All right, so factors of evolution and evidence of evolution. So the first part, we're going to look at different types of evolution, things that can contribute to evolution. And then the second part, we're going to look at how we know evolution has happened and is happening. All right, so first up, we're going to talk about artificial selection. Artificial selection is a fantastic way to see how selection can influence a population in a controlled setting. So we're not letting nature kind of do what nature does. We're going to intervene and control what's happening. Some examples of artificial selection are things like dogs. We selectively bred them from wolves. House cats were selectively bred from wild cats. We selected for these traits that are desirable for house pets. Many of our food crops and livestock were also selectively bred. We want the fattest, juiciest tomatoes. We want wheat that produces a lot of those seeds that we're going to grind up and eat. We want juicy, sweet corn. We want our livestock to be good and meaty. We're selectively choosing specific traits that we want as humans. So a great example I have here are these little chickens. In the 50s, this was the average chicken that we ate as humans, about 1,000 grams, so about a kilogram. In the 70s, a couple decades later, they've doubled in size. We selected for these bigger, fatter chickens. It's twice as big. It's heavy. And then a few decades after that, in the 2000s, look at this chicken. Now it is 4 times the size of that 50s chicken. We kept choosing the fat chickens to breed with fat chickens, and the result is bigger, fatter chickens, more meat per chicken. I'm sure the chickens now in the 2020s are even bigger and fatter. So this is just an example of how we do artificial selection on things like livestock. This is bred specifically for food. We want to get the most out of each chicken. Another one, I'm a dog person, so I'm just gonna fangirl a little bit over dogs and wolves and things like that. So how did we get from a wolf to like this derpy looking pug over here? Well, humans have desirable traits. That's true. It's all good until they're elephant chickens for sure. We're gonna have like giant human-sized chickens coming after us. You can't eat me, I'm bigger than you. Anyway, so here we have this wolf. It is very fierce. It has defining features, big pointy ears, long snout so it can smell out its prey. It's fairly big. If you've ever seen a wolf, like an actual wolf compared to humans, they're like big, terrifying. So how do we get from that fierce predator to like this cute little, like, I can hold a pug and it's just gonna sit there and stare at me? So humans were like, this wolf is pretty cool, but I want it a little more friendly. So I'm gonna take a friendly wolf and breed it with another friendly wolf, and hopefully its babies will get friendlier. I want a dog that has a shorter muzzle or a shorter snout. It doesn't need that longer snout to find its prey because I'm just gonna feed it. It doesn't have to go and hunt. So I'm gonna take a short snout wolf and another short snout wolf, breed them together. We're gonna get a bunch of short snout babies. And we'll take the shortest snouts of those and breed them together. And so we'll eventually get this pug that has a smushed face. It has like no muzzle at all. It's just kind of sitting on its face, like, I guess, kind of like a human. Same thing for, I want big eyes. I want a small body. I want floppy ears. All of these traits we're going to select for and breed those together to get the sort of end result we want, from a wolf to a kind of funny, pathetic looking pug. Kind of crazy. If you are interested in this stuff, I found this amazing video about fox domestication. It is fascinating. I highly recommend it. It's only about 10 minutes. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, super duper cool. It talks about how they're taking wild foxes. It's something that's happening right now. It started in the 60s and they're still continuing this research where they are selectively breeding for only one trait. For only one trait. So instead of going, oh, well, this one's small and it has floppy ears, or this one is big and is just like, got a short nose, whatever. No, it's only focusing on one trait, and that is its behavior, its friendliness towards humans. And so what they've done is they've taken generations of foxes and bred for these sort of friendly genes. And so we have these domesticated foxes, and it's really, really cool and interesting. I highly recommend it. I don't think we're going to have time to watch it in class, but the link is here on slide 3 if you are curious. All right, then another sort of repeat, again, repetition is key, just really drive it into your brain there. When humans select or choose which offspring mate, that is the artificial selection. We are artificially telling nature what to do instead of the dogs, whatever. Hey, just find whichever dog you think is the coolest and sweetest and whatever. No, we're saying you dog right there needs to mate with this dog here. You don't get a choice. It's not just like, whatever, we're going to let a bunch of dogs loose and see what happens. No, artificially selecting for those traits that we want. One of my most favorite examples is these vegetables. We're all pretty familiar with these. We see them in the grocery store. We have cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, kale, kohlrabi. That one's kind of a little bit different. You can't find that as commonly. And Brussels sprouts. All 6 of these plants, these vegetables, came from one plant, wild mustard. And humans artificially selected for certain traits that they wanted for these specific vegetables. So for example, I really like the leaves of a mustard plant. So I'm going to take this very leafy mustard plant and breed it with another really leafy mustard plant. And throughout the generations, for selecting that very leafy trait, I'm going to end up with kale. If I really like mustard flowers, I think they're super cool and tasty, I'm going to breed together mustard plants with really big flower buds with other mustard plants with really big flower buds. And after many generations of selecting for this big flower bud, we're going to end up with cauliflower. Cauliflower is actually a flower. If you grow cauliflower and you let it just kind of go forever instead of like harvesting it to eat it, you will actually see those sort of bud things on the crown part of it. They turn into flowers and they pollinate. It's kind of cool and crazy. I did that with broccoli once when I had a little like vegetable garden. I let one of my broccoli plants just kind of go. Really cool. Anyway, and then the last one I'll talk about is Brussels sprouts. I'm not going to touch on all of them, but I think I was about maybe 13 or 14 when I first saw Brussels sprouts on a stalk. I don't know how I thought Brussels sprouts used to grow. Maybe they were like on a bush or something. But actually, I think in Trader Joe's, a lot of times they sell Brussels sprouts on the stalk. There's actually like a stem with all these little Brussels sprout buds growing out of it. That's how Brussels sprouts grow. Kind of crazy. And the reason we have them is because at some point in human history, we were like, ooh, look at this mustard plant. It has a bunch of buds going down the stem, down the side of the stem, instead of just at the very tip. I'm going to select for that. And after many generations of selecting for that lateral bud, so the bud's down along the stem, we're going to get Brussels sprouts. Kind of crazy. So all of these different vegetables come from this very one single plant. They have a common ancestor of this wild mustard. Results of human artificial selection. The next bit I want to talk about that influences evolution is what we call the struggle for existence. Populations are limited, as we know from Malthus, by resources. There's only so much food, there's only so much space, there's only so much water, etc. We have to compete for them. So the struggle for existence is when living organisms, whether they're in the same population or in just an ecosystem, everything needs water. Bugs need water, mammals need water, birds need water. Everything, all of life needs water to survive. So we're going to have to compete for that water. If I don't get that water, you may get that water. And if I get that water, you may not get that water. There's only so much. So when we're competing for those resources and we get those resources, we're going to survive. But if we don't get those resources, if I can't get food, I'm not going to make it. And generally speaking, the purpose of life for all life on Earth is to pass on genetic information. Us as humans, we're a little bit higher order thinking organisms. We may not consider reproducing our main purpose in life, but for the rest of life on Earth, that is the main purpose. Get my genes onto the next generation. So if we can't survive because we're competing for these resources, we can't pass on that genetic information. We can't continue our lineage. This brings us to fitness and adaptation. Fitness and adaptation. So the struggle for existence includes not being eaten. I don't want to get eaten. If I get eaten too soon and I don't get to have babies, my genetic information does not get passed on. So we're going to learn a couple new vocab words here. Glad you made it. Thanks for checking in. Fitness is the ability to survive in an environment. I am fit for an environment if I can make it to reproduction. I get a mate, I make babies, I was fit enough, and now I can, die or continue to produce more babies. Adaptations are another way to, pass on your genetic information. If I inherit a characteristic or a trait that increases my survival, that's good. That makes me more fit for an environment. When we were thinking about those bunnies from Tuesday, we saw that sort of shift in phenotype of that color of the bunnies. In the green foresty sort of environment, the white bunnies got picked off. They were prey. Bye. They don't get to reproduce and pass on those white fur genes. The green and yellow bunnies did survive. They camouflage, so they pass on those green and yellow traits, and their offspring have those green and yellow traits. And so they adapted to the environment by not being prey. They were able to pass on those genes because they didn't get eaten. Their adaptation was that color change. All right, so before we move on, I want to watch the first 3 minutes of this video. I think it's pretty fascinating. It's about mice.
Across the American Southwest, golden deserts dotted by cacti and brush stretch for miles. Yet here in New Mexico's Valley of Fire, the landscape changes dramatically. Patches of black rock interrupt the sand, remnants of volcanic eruptions that occurred about 1,000 years ago. The eruption spewed a river of lava more than 40 miles long across the desert. As the molten rock cooled, it darkened, leaving any creature dependent upon camouflage in serious trouble. In the complex battle of life, one of the constant struggles is between seeing and not being seen, the evolutionary game of hide and seek. And we've come here to the Valley of Fire in New Mexico, a battlefield, to find one of the tiniest soldiers and what it can teach us about how evolution works. On the desert sands, the rock pocket mouse blends in perfectly, its light-colored fur concealing it from predators. But on dark lava, the same fur makes the mouse stand out, attracting the many creatures that see it as food.
These mice are the Snickers bar of the desert. They're eaten by foxes and coyotes and rattlesnakes and certainly by owls and maybe even occasionally hawks. And most of those predators are visual predators.
So what happened to the pocket mice that found themselves on this new terrain? When I accompany biologist Michael Nachman onto the lava, it doesn't take long to find out.
Oh, this one's closed.
Nachman has been collecting mice unharmed in traps. And it's a dark one.
It is, yeah.
Now, are most of the ones you find up here dark?
Almost all of them.
Not only have the mice here evolved to be as dark as the rock,
Shake them into the bag.
the color change has occurred precisely where it will conceal them from hunters. Now, a bit of a white underbelly, too.
That's right. All of the dark ones here and on other lava flows have a white underbelly, and presumably there's no selection for dark on the belly because predators are coming from above.
Left to themselves, the mice show no preference for light or dark rocks. It's the predators that have made the difference.
The change in color over evolutionary time in the population is driven by predators weeding out the mice that don't match their background.
But how did the dark mice arise in the first place?
That's all we're going to watch for now. If you want to finish it, please feel free. It's on slide 6. Pretty fascinating. But we're going to pause there and continue on with our slideshow. All right, so what we're watching is this survival of the fittest. These predators are selecting for these changes in phenotype. So if a species has high fitness, it's more likely to survive. If it has low fitness, it's most likely going to not survive. It's not going to make it to that stage of reproduction unless it adapts. This is called survival of the fittest. The fittest, the most able in each environment, is most likely going to survive, pass on its genes, achieve its life goal. What we were seeing with the pocket mice is the selection by predators. So it's kind of like what we were also seeing with the bunnies on Tuesday. So here we have a hawk or something, some sort of predatory raptor bird, and we're on some dark volcanic rock. We have a lot of these sandy colored pocket mice, these light colored ones, and only a few dark ones that blend in with the lava rock. The predator comes, it sees those light ones that stand out. They're not camouflaging very well. They haven't made that adaptation. And what we're left with is now only a few of the light colored ones and more of the dark colored ones. The dark colored ones blended in, they camouflaged, they weren't as easily spotted, so they survived. They were the fittest for this environment of dark lava rock. Then, after they reproduce, the next generation shows us that because we have fewer of these light colored mice, fewer of them are going to be present. They didn't get to pass on their genes because they were eaten. And these dark colored mice that did survive, they were more fit for their environment. They had the adaptation of darker fur. They were able to pass on their genes. We see more dark furred mice. Now in the video, they mentioned that the selection happened from predators. This is because the mice don't have a preference, light color to dark rock, light sand versus dark rock. Wherever they happen to make their home is where they make their home. And where we're seeing this skew in color is selected for by the predators. Whichever one stands out the most is the one that's going to get eaten. These dark mice are not going to camouflage very well in the sand. The sandy, light-colored mice are not going to survive very well on the dark lava rock. So we're seeing a selection from predators. Whichever one's easiest to spot is going to get eaten. They won't pass on their genes for that coloration. We're also going to look a little bit at descent with modification. So why do we even have these different colored pocket mice? Some are light colored, some are dark colored. Where does that diversity come from? Why does each generation vary with their pheno and genotypes? Hey, we already know the answer to this. Meiosis, mutation. During meiosis, we get that genetic variation from things like crossing over. We're going to make new alleles combinations, potentially giving us that dark fur color. In the video, they also talked about how everything was just kind of light and sandy until these volcanoes erupted, giving us that dark volcanic rock as it solidified. And so once upon a time before those volcanoes erupted, we only had these light colored pocket mice. I'm sure we had a few darker ones here and there, as they are probably a recessive phenotype. Or maybe a mutation happened. We got, a weird blip in our genetic code. Now we have a dark colored mouse. But because of this predator selection, light colored mice are more fit for the sandy area, dark colored mice are more fit for the volcanic rock area. We get descent with modification. Every living species has descended from previous individuals and species, but each generation has a tiny itty bitty little change. If we're looking at the volcanic rock, the ones there that didn't get picked off by predators because they camouflage better, their offspring are going to be modified a little bit. They're going to get that adaptation of darker fur. They all descended from these, light-colored mice from the sand until the volcano erupted, giving us a dark volcanic rock. Modifications happened. Oh, look, the dark ones are surviving. They're passing on those dark fur genes. Descending with modifications, the adaptations. That brings us to common descent. Guess what, guys? Long, 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 billions and billions of years ago, a long time ago, all life was single-celled organisms. We are descended from single-celled organisms. Our dogs, our birds, our plants, everything at some point has a very common ancestor. So here on this little diagram here, we have this very first life form, so to speak, and things started evolving. Maybe we got some photosynthesis happening. We have some plants that are coming from this single-celled organism. Maybe we have some that have some mitochondria and they're going to do cellular respiration and we're going to move towards animals. But everything is related, essentially, by that one original single-celled organism. If we're looking a little less, widespread, focusing on, let's say, humans. Humans, we have a lot in common with apes because we are descended from apes and monkeys. We're going to look now at some evidence of this sort of common descent. Common descent is that thought, that philosophy that all living things are descended from common ancestors. We have a lot of things in common with monkeys and apes. Dogs have a lot in common with wolves and other canine species. They have common ancestors. And the evidence we have is, I best remember using this acronym, FAME, F-A-M-E. And F stands for fossil evidence. So looking at our fossil record, all of those ancient species and ancient organisms, we have a record of them. They existed. We have their imprints, their bones in rock. We can look at those and see what the past had records of, essentially, not actually writing stuff down, but the fossil record, we can look at that and see evolution actually happening. The A stands for anatomical structures. We can look at body parts and body structures across all species and see similarities and possibly differences. The M stands for molecular evidence. So when we get down really, really itty bitty tiny, we can look at things like DNA, RNA, ATP, amino acids. Compare those molecules. What things do we have in common? Who are we related to based on those molecules, those biological molecules? And the E stands for embryological evidence. So embryos are our sort of earliest form of life development. So we have at the end of meiosis, we have our two types of gametes. We have sperm, we have eggs. They come together, they fertilize, we get a zygote. Then that zygote starts going through mitosis very rapidly, multiplying all these cells, bloom, bloom, bloom. Then we get into what we call an embryo. Now, this embryo is the first time that in this sort of development of growth that we're seeing an actual thing. Instead of just a bunch of cells, we're actually seeing a little itty bitty tiny organism. And there are similarities at this very, very early stage in development. So we're going to take a look at that embryological evidence as well. All right, so first up are fossils, the F in FAME. They can tell us a lot of different things. What kind of organisms they were, how they changed, what they ate, how they moved, what the climate was like based on, their bone structures, based on, maybe the climate. If it was really hot and tropical, we get really big tropical plants. If it is kind of cold and dry, maybe we get a lot of little skinny plants. Plants make imprints. We have fossils of plants too. Kind of cool. So our evidence that we're going to look at right now is of horses and their ancestors. So up at the top, we have our different periods or eras of time. Along the side, it tells us what these different fossils are. So this top row, we're going to look at the progression of teeth in these horse ancestors. And the bottom two rows here, we're looking at 4 feet, 4 limbs of these horses and their ancestors. So one is the front view, one is the side view of those 4 limbs. Now, early Eocene, that is the farthest back we go in this particular fossil record, and the Pleistocene is sort of the most recent of these fossils. For our teeth, we're looking at molar teeth. So right away, we know that this is most likely an herbivore. If we know teeth, sharp and jagged teeth are usually for carnivores. You need those sharp teeth to rip apart the meat to eat it. You can't just like, well, some species do, but most carnivores don't just like swallow a deer whole. No, you got to take it apart and eat it. Some predatory birds and reptiles can eat their prey whole, but they also don't have the same kind of teeth that, let's say, like a saber-toothed cat might have. Anyway, molar teeth, so wider, flatter teeth, are often seen in herbivores. You need to be able to grind up that plant matter in order to eat it and digest it. So here we have molars. So right away we know that this horse ancestor most likely ate plants. It was an herbivore. And over time, these molars got bigger and bigger. They needed to eat more and more so that their teeth grew to accommodate for more of that plant matter that they're eating. So maybe early on they didn't eat as much plant matter, and over time we see that they ate more and more of that yummy green stuff. Next, let's look at our forefeet. We can tell a little bit about how these creatures move based on their bone structure. So here we have this first foot, we have some 4 toes, we have kind of almost, it's the most vertical of all of our 4 limbs here based on this bottom row, looking at it sideways. And it's sort of just kind of like gently walked around on its toes. Then over time, we're seeing that we're losing some digits. These middle 2, where there's only 3 toes on this foot. The one in the late Miocene, this one right here, we basically have 1 main toe and then 2 kind of just hanging off on the side. How does this change the way this animal walks? Well, if there are less toes to support, we're going to get more of a bend in that wrist area. So we're seeing a sort of bend and elongation of that wrist. And then this most recent fossil, the Pleistocene, we've lost all the other toes. It's just a single-toed animal now. And its forelimb shape has also changed to help support the weight of the animal. Our forelimb needs to change because we only have that 1 toe instead of many toes. So we're seeing the way that this animal may have moved just based on its shapes and forms in the structure of its bones. Super cool. So we're looking at the fossil record. We're actually seeing evolution happen over time. Really cool. Next up is the A in FAME. This stands for anatomical structures. We're going to look at the anatomy of some different animals. First up is homologous structures. We know the term homologous already. Yes, no new vocab there. Homologous means same. We're looking at the same structures. So looking at our bones here, we have a human, we have a cat, a whale, and a bat. All of these are mammals. We all have the same bones, but they're being used in different ways. So we have similar structures, different functions. So humans, we use our arms to move stuff, pick things up. They're not really under a lot of stress all the time. Cats use their forearms to walk. They're quadrupedal. So their form, their structure of their arm is different. We still have the same bones. We both have humeruses, we both have radii and ulnuses. We all have these wrist bones. And then the brown things at the end are phalanges, our fingers. They're just shaped differently because they have a different purpose. Cats walk on their front feet. They use them for walking. They need more support. So their structure looks a little bit different. Same bones, different structure because we have a different function. Next up, we have a whale, another completely different mode of locomotion. Whales swim in the water. They don't need to support weight the same way that cats do. So that means not only do they have the same bones, but they look different. We have a different function. They still have a radius, they still have an ulna, they still have wrist bones and fingers, but they look different. I believe actually in whales, their wrist bones are actually fused together because they don't need wrists. They're just using their arms and kind of fingers as one long thing. Perhaps the phalanges kind of help with the direction of the way they flap their flippers or whatever. But again, same structures, humerus, radius, ulna, wrist bones, fingers. Different function, they're swimmers. And last up is a bat, which is also a mammal. We can tell because of its bone structure, among other things. But looking at our homologous structures here, it has a humerus, a radius, an ulna, carpals or wrist bones, and phalanges. It uses them in a different way. Bats fly as their main mode of locomotion. Their fingers make up most of their wing. They're really long, they're very thin, and they have skin stretched around them to sort of give them that wing shape to get lift. Same bones, different function. We know that mammals are all related, not only because of other things that mammals have, hair, live birth, milk, things like that, but we all have the same bones. We have a common ancestor. We have the same bone structures. Different functions, same bones. Next up are vestigial structures. This is a very difficult one to remember because vestigial is a weird word. But vestigial structures are those that have little or no function. So here we have a whale. Whales swim in the ocean. They don't have legs, they don't walk. But when we look at a whale's skeleton, they have a pelvis and femur. The pelvis is our hips, and femurs are the big leg bone in our legs. Whales don't walk, but they still have this pelvis and femur. So that gives us an indication that they are descended from creatures that had hips and legs, descended from creatures that could walk. Now, over time, they've lost a lot of those leg bones, and we're kind of left with this pelvis and femur. And perhaps a couple million years in the future, they're going to not have the pelvis and femur at all either. But they don't have a function. They just give us a clue into their past. They are related to mammals that potentially walked around because of that pelvis and femur that's present in their skeletal structure. Another example is the appendix in humans. The appendix is kind of useless for us. We can get it removed, be totally fine functioning humans. It used to have a role in, I believe, the immune system. In some other mammals, they need the appendix to survive, and if without it, they'll die. But in humans, it's a vestigial structure. We don't actually need it. Last up for our structures here are analogous structures. These are the opposite of the first one we looked at, the homologous structures. Sounds similar or different. So this is the opposite. All of these have the same function, but different structures. So here we're going to look at wings. All of these wings come from animals that can fly. Insects can fly. Pterosaurs are those big flying dinosaurs. Those flew. Birds, bats. But if we look at their structures, they're all different. For the insects, they don't have bones at all. They have exoskeletons. And their wings are made of something called chitin. It's the same thing their exoskeletons are made of. It's kind of hard, but their wings are so thin that it's actually kind of flexible and it helps them fly. They also have veins to kind of help get their blood flowing through there. But they don't actually have bones in their wings, but they can still fly. Pterosaurs, these flying dinosaurs, they have sort of this single long bone that goes along the edge, and the rest of it is kind of like meat and skin that helps them flap and get lift. Completely different structure than these insects, but the same function. It still uses this to fly. Next up, birds. Birds do have bones. They have a sort of humerus, radius, and ulna, but they don't have hands. It's just another like long bone, and they get their flight from feathers. They flap their wings, the feathers help, but they are different structure. We have different bones here to give us the same function of flight. And last up, we already talked a little bit about bats. They have sort of a hand with skin in between to help them fly and get lift there. So again, analogous means same function, different structure. So it's opposite of our homologous structures. All right, up next is the M in FAME for molecules. We're going to compare our biological molecules, things like DNA, RNA, amino acids, ATP. And if we compare them, we can see similarities and differences. We can tell how closely or distantly related different organisms are. So here we're going to look at some amino acid sequences. Here in humans, we're at the top. We're going to compare us with horses, gorillas, chimpanzees, and zebras. In this sequence of amino acids of hemoglobin, we're going to see some similarities and differences. So humans go lysine, oh shoot, I keep forgetting to look it up. I don't remember what the GLU stands for now. I used to remember when we did our code on wheels. So we have lysine, glu, histone, and isoleucine. That is the order of human amino acids for this hemoglobin molecule. Compare us to a horse. Ooh, lots of differences. They have arginine, lysine, histone, and lysine. The only commonality we have is this histone as the third amino acid. Everything else is different, so we're not very closely related to horses. Compare us to gorillas. We have very similar orders of amino acids here. The only difference is this last one, they have a second lysine, while we still have an isoleucine. Chimpanzees, we are exactly the same in this particular order of amino acids. Very closely related, not many differences. And if we compare like horses and zebras, again, we see a lot of similarities. They must be closely related. Their only difference is this last amino acid. Horses have lysine, zebras have arginine. If you look over at this table to the right, there's some more of these sort of comparisons telling us how closely or distantly related these organisms are. Horses and zebras, there's only one difference, meaning they're pretty closely related. Horses and gorillas, two differences, not nearly as closely related as that horse and zebra. Horses and chimps, the most differences, three differences, not closely related at all. Us and chimps, absolutely no differences, very, very closely related. We're basically cousins. And humans and gorillas, there's only one difference there. We're pretty closely related to gorillas. So we can look at these biomolecules going down on the micro scale here, looking at these molecules as individual molecules. We can actually look at the evidence of how closely or distantly related we are to other organisms. Last bit here, embryology. Again, those embryos are the most early stages of development of an organism. And if we look and compare across different organisms, we see a lot of similarities. So here on the left, we have a chicken embryo compared to a human embryo on the right. Very similar shape, very similar structure. We both have eyes, we both have spines and a tail. Yes, in our fetal stages, we do have tails. And something called a pharyngeal pouch, which is where we store some of our like guts and other valuable nutrients and things like that. Lots and lots of similarities. As these organisms develop, we start to see more and more differences. But way, way, way back in time, when we possibly could have had a common ancestor where their embryos developed in this way, we are related to chickens in some very distant way. Kind of crazy. By looking at these early stages of life, we can see that, yes, in fact, we do have a common ancestor with chickens. It does look kind of like a dinosaur. All right. Any questions, comments, concerns, clarifications? Do I need to go back on anything for notes?